The Battle of Hong Kong, also known as the Defense of Hong Kong and the Fall of Hong Kong, was one of the first battles of the Pacific Campaign of World War II. On the same morning as the attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, forces of the Empire of Japan attacked British Hong Kong. The attack was in violation of international law as Japan had not declared war against the British Empire. Japan's unprovoked act of aggression was met with stiff resistance from Hong Kong's garrison, composed of local troops as well as British, Canadian and Indian units. Within a week the defenders abandoned the mainland, and less than 2 weeks later, with their position on the island untenable, the colony surrendered. Background: Britain first thought of Japan as a threat with the ending of the Anglo-Japanese alliance in the early 1920s, a threat that increased with the escalation of the Second Sino-Japanese War. On 21 October 1938, the Japanese-occupied Canton in Hong Kong was effectively surrounded. Various British defence studies concluded that Hong Kong would be extremely hard to defend in the event of a Japanese attack, but, in the mid-1930s, work began on new defence facilities, including the Gin Drinkers Line. Key sites of the defense of Hong Kong included Wong Nai Chung Gap, Lai Moon Passage, Shing Mun Redoubt, Devil's Peak, Stanley Fort. By 1940, the British determined to reduce the Hong Kong garrison to only a symbolic size. Air Chief Marshal Sir Robert Brooke Popham, the Commander-in-Chief of the British Far East Command, argued that limited reinforcements could allow the garrison to delay a Japanese attack, gaining time elsewhere. Winston Churchill and his army chiefs designated Hong Kong as an outpost, and initially decided against sending more troops to the colony. In September 1941, they reversed their decision and argued that additional reinforcements would provide a military deterrent against the Japanese, and reassure Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek that Britain was genuinely interested in defending the colony. Canadian contribution. In autumn 1941, the British government accepted an offer by the Canadian government to send 2 infantry battalions and a brigade headquarters to reinforce the Hong Kong garrison. Sea Force, as it was known, arrived on 16 November on board the troopship Aotea and the armed merchant cruiser Prince Robert. It did not have all of its equipment as a ship carrying its vehicles was diverted to Manila, Philippine Islands, at the outbreak of war. The Canadian battalions were the Royal Rifles of Canada from Quebec and Winnipeg Grenadiers from Manitoba. The Royal Rifles had served only in Newfoundland and St. John, New Brunswick, prior to their duty in Hong Kong, and the Winnipeg Grenadiers had been posted to Jamaica. As a result, many of the Canadian soldiers did not have much field experience before arriving in Hong Kong. Order of battle: Empire of Japan, Imperial Japanese Army, 23rd Army, 38th Division, 228th, 229th and 230th Infantry Regiments, Saraki Detachment, Rearguard, 2nd Independent Anti-Tank Gun Battalion, 5th Independent Anti-Tank Gun Battalion, 10th Independent Mountain Artillery Regiment, 20th Independent Mountain Artillery Battalion, 21st Mortar Battalion, 20th Independent Engineer Regiment, 1 Radio Signal Platoon, 1/3 of Medical Unit, 51st Division, 1st and 2nd River Crossing Material Company, 9th Division, 3 companies, a 3rd Independent Transportation Regiment, 19th Independent Transport Company, 20th Independent Transport Company, 21st Independent Transport Company, 17th Field Water Purification and Supply Unit, 23rd Army Air Unit, 45th Air Regiment, element of 44th Independent Air Unit, 2 formations of 10th Independent Air Squad, 47th Airfield Battalion, elements of 67th Airfield Battalion, 67th Airfield Company, Imperial Japanese Navy 2nd China Expeditionary Fleet, British Commonwealth Infantry 2nd Battalion, the Royal Scots Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment 1st Battalion, the Middlesex Regiment 5th Battalion, 7th Rajput Regiment 2nd Battalion, 14th Punjab Regiment 1st Battalion, the Winnipeg Grenadiers, the Royal Rifles of Canada, Hong Kong Chinese Regiment Infantry Companies, Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps, Artillery 8th Coast Regiment, a Royal Artillery 12th Coast Regiment, a Royal Artillery 5th Anti-Air Regiment, a Royal Artillery 956th Defence Battery, Royal Artillery 1st Hong Kong Regiment, Hong Kong and Singapore Royal Artillery, Artillery Batteries, Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps. Supporting units: Royal Engineers, Royal Army Service Corps, RASC Royal Army Medical Corps, RAMC Royal Signals, RS Royal Army Ordnance Corps, RAOC Royal Army Dental Corps, RADC Royal Army Pay Corps, RAPC Military Provost Staff Corps, Indian Hospital Corps, IHC Indian Medical Service, IMS Royal Indian Army Service Corps, RIASC Hong Kong Mule Corps, Corps of Military Staff Clerks, Canadian Province Corps, Royal Canadian Army Medical Corps, RCAMC Canadian Army Dental Corps, Canadian Service, Royal Canadian Corps of Signals, RCCS Royal Canadian Army Service Corps, RCASC Royal Canadian Army Pay Corps, RCAPC Canadian Postal Corps, Royal Canadian Ordnance Corps, RCOC Canadian Chaplains Service, Canadian Auxiliary Services. Supporting units: Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps. Battle. The Japanese attack began shortly after 800 on the 8th of December 1941, less than 8 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attack was not preceded by a declaration of war and so was in clear violation of international law. British, Canadian and Indian forces, commanded by Major General Christopher Maltby, supported by the Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps, resisted the Japanese attack by the Japanese 21st, 23rd and the 38th Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant General Takashi Sakai, but were outnumbered nearly 4-1 and lacked their opponents' recent combat experience. The colony had no significant air defense. The RAF station at Hong Kong's Kai Tak Airport had only 5 aeroplanes, 2 Supermarine Walrus amphibians and 3 Vickers Wildebeest torpedo reconnaissance bombers, flown and serviced by 7 officers and 108 airmen. An earlier request for a fighter squadron had been rejected, and the nearest fully operational RAF base was in Kota Baru, Malaya, nearly 2,250 kilometers away. Hong Kong also lacked adequate naval defense. 3 destroyers were to withdraw to Singapore Naval Base. Battle of Kowloon and New Territories. The Japanese bombed Kai Tak Airport on the 8th of December. 2 of the 3 Wildebeest and the 2 Walrus were destroyed by 12 Japanese bombers. The attack also destroyed several civil aircraft, including all but 2 of the aircraft used by the air unit of the Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps. The RAF and air unit personnel from then on fought as ground troops. 2 of the Royal Navy's 3 remaining destroyers were ordered to leave Hong Kong for Singapore. Only 1 destroyer, HMS Thracian, several gunboats and a flotilla of motor torpedo boats remained. On 8, 9 and the 10th of December, 8 American pilots of the China National Aviation Corporation (CNAC) and their crews made a total of 16 trips between Kai Tak Airport and airports in Namyang and Chongqing in China, the wartime capital of the Republic of China. According to articles in the New York Times and the Chicago Daily of 15 December 1941, the pilots' names were Charles L. Sharp, Hugh L. Woods, Harold A. Sweet, William McDonald, Frank L. Higgs, Robert S. Angle, P.W. Kessler and S.E. Scott. Together they made 16 sorties and evacuated 275 persons, including MME Sun Yat-sen, the widow of the father of the nation, and the Chinese finance minister Kung Xiang HSI. The Commonwealth forces decided against holding the Shamchan River and instead established 3 battalions in the Jindrinkas line across the hills. The Japanese 38th Infantry under the command of Major General Takaishi Sakai quickly forded the Shamchan River by using temporary bridges. Early on 10 December 1941, the 228th Infantry Regiment, commanded by Colonel Tehechi, of the 38th Division, attacked the Commonwealth defences at the Shingmun Redoubt, defended by 2nd Battalion Royal Scots, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel S. White. The line was breached in 5 hours, and later that day the Royal Scots also withdrew from Golden Hill. D Company of the Royal Scots counterattacked and captured Golden Hill. By 10 a.m. the hill was again taken by the Japanese. This made the situation on the new territories in Kowloon untenable, and the evacuation to Hong Kong Island started on the 11th of December 1941 under aerial bombardment and artillery barrage. As much as possible, military and harbour facilities were demolished before the withdrawal. By the 13th of December, the 5/7th Rajputs of the British Indian Army, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel R. Cadogan Rawlinson, the last Commonwealth troops on the mainland, had retreated to Hong Kong Island. Battle of Hong Kong Island. Maltby organised the defence of the island, splitting it between an East Brigade and a West Brigade. On the 15th of December, the Japanese began systematic bombardment of the island's north shore. 2 demands for surrender were made on 13 and the 17th of December. When these were rejected, Japanese forces crossed the harbour on the evening of the 18th of December and landed on the island's northeast. They suffered only light casualties, although no effective command could be maintained until the dawn came. That night, approximately 20 gunners were executed at the Saiwan battery despite having surrendered. There was a further massacre of prisoners, this time of medical staff, in the Salesian mission on Chaiwan Road. In both cases, a few men survived to tell the story. On the morning of the 19th of December, fierce fighting continued on Hong Kong Island, but the Japanese annihilated the headquarters of West Brigade, causing the death of Brigadier John K. Lawson, the commander of the West Brigade. A British counterattack could not force them from the Wong Nai Chung Gap that secured the passage between the north coast at Causeway Bay and the secluded southern parts of the island. From the 20th of December, the island became split in two, with the British Commonwealth forces still holding out around the Stanley Peninsula and in the west of the island. At the same time, water supplies started to run short as the Japanese captured the island's reservoirs. On the morning of the 25th of December, Japanese soldiers entered the British Field Hospital at St. Stephen's College, and in the St. Stephen's College incident tortured and killed a large number of injured soldiers, along with the medical staff. By the afternoon of the 25th of December 1941, it was clear that further resistance would be futile, and British colonial officials headed by the Governor of Hong Kong, Sir Mark Atchison Young, surrendered in person at the Japanese headquarters on the third floor of the Peninsula Hong Kong Hotel. This was the first occasion on which a British Crown colony had surrendered to an invading force. The garrison had held out for 17 days. This day is known in Hong Kong as Black Christmas. Massacres. Saiwan Hill. Perhaps as many as 28 people were massacred after the fight for Saiwan Hill. These men were members of the 5th Anti-Aircraft Battery of the Hong Kong Volunteer Defence Corps. Silesian mission at Shaw Kei-1. There was a Silesian mission being used as an advanced dressing station. On the night of the 18th of December, it was surrounded by troops of the 229th Infantry Regiment. At 07:00 on the 19th, Captain Martin Banfield of the Canadian Medical Corps surrendered the station. 2 injured officers of the 7th Rajput Regiment were murdered upon arrival in an ambulance. The Japanese separated the male medical staff from the female. All but 3 of the men were killed. Most of the victims were of the Royal Army Medical Corps, but also at least 2 men of the Royal Rifles of Canada and 2 civilians. Causeway Bay. 3 captured persons were executed at Causeway Bay, including a female air raid warden with the local air raid precautions. Wong Nai Chung Gap. At Wong Nai Chung Gap, 10 men of the St. John's ambulance were killed, as well as a policeman and a medic. Jardins Lookout. 4 men each of the 3rd Company HKVDC and the Winnipeg Grenadiers were massacred after battle at Jardins Lookout. One grenadier, a private Kilfoyle, was killed on the forced march to North Point, according to witnesses. Black Hole of Hong Kong. 4 men were killed in the so-called Black Hole of Hong Kong, including 2 Canadian officers. Blue Pool Road. Around 30 civilians of different ethnicities were massacred at Blue Pool Road. The Ridge, over Bays and Uclear. In the worst massacre of POWs of the battle, the Japanese killed at least 47 after taking the Ridge. Among the dead was Major Charles Sidney Clark of China Command HQ, 2 men of the 12th and 20th Coastal Regiments of the Royal Artillery, 6 men of the Royal Army Service Corps and 2 of the Royal Canadian Army Service Corps, 19 men of the Royal Army Ordnance Corps and 3 of the Royal Canadian Ordnance Corps, and 14 men of the RASC Company of the HKVDC. The Japanese also executed at least 14 captives at Overbays, men of the same units as at the Ridge, but also including 3 Royal Rifles of Canada and an officer of the 1st Battalion, Middlesex Regiment. A further 7 were killed at Uclear, and another 36 known victims cannot be placed precisely at one of the 3 locations. Ride, who was present at the surrender, stated later that he saw 50 bodies lying by the road, including 6 Middlesex men among them. These men may have been some of those attached to the Hong Kong Chinese Regiment. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission report also states that 5 men of the Royal Air Force went missing near the Ridge on the 20th of December, perhaps captured and killed. Deepwater Bay Ride. 6 men of the Middlesex were killed defending PB-14 at Deepwater Bay Ride. It is uncertain whether they were killed in action, or murdered after capture. St. Stephen's College. The massacre perpetrated at St. Stephen's College is the least well known. Only 13 victims can be confirmed at the location, but reports and estimates put the real number as high as 99. The names of all the reported victims may never be known. Between 75 and 150 bodies were cremated by the victors in the aftermath of the battle. But this total includes the victims of the fighting around Stanley Fort, such as the men of 965 Defense Battery. Although it is the most infamous massacre, it has been the hardest to match with records. 3 British and 4 Chinese nurses were said to have been raped and murdered, and 1 Canadian, Captain Overton Stark-Hickey of the RCASC, murdered trying to stop the rapes. Besides the raped nurses, the medical staff suffered 2 deaths, a doctor shot in the head whilst attempting escape, and 25 orderlies of the Indian Hospital Corps and St. John ambulance personnel. The 55 St. John victims of the Battle of Hong Kong are memorialized at the present headquarters in Hong Kong. But since no dates are given on the memorial, it is impossible to identify those killed at St. Stephen's. 4 Chinese servants and 1 civilian, Tam Chung Huan, were killed. Tam is the only Chinese victim of this massacre known by name. Among the soldiers receiving treatment at the college, 2 riflemen were mutilated and murdered, and a further 56 men were reportedly bayoneted in their beds. Some of these men may have been Royal Rifles whose deaths are incorrectly reported as occurring elsewhere. On the 26th of December, Mary Knoll Mission, at least 8 men, 6 of the Middlesex and 2 Royal Engineers, were killed after capture at Mary Knoll Mission. 4 members of the 8th Coastal Regiment RA may have been killed here as well. Estimates of the number of men murdered vary from 11 to 16. Brick Hill. 26 prisoners are believed to have been killed after the fighting for Brick Hill, but some of these may have died in the fight, including some of the 17 men of the heavy anti-aircraft, Hong Kong and Singapore Royal Artillery known to have died there. Most of the soldiers here murdered were Muslims, including 1 religious teacher.